Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps with the algorithm. Thanks. Content warning. The following video contains material that may be harmful or traumatizing to some audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. Joel Guy Jr., 28 at the time of the murders, was the son of Joel Guy Sr., 61, and Lisa Guy, 55. His father was a pipeline engineering designer while his mother worked as a human resources accounts. Guy Sr. also had 3 daughters from his first marriage. Throughout his life, Joel Guy Jr. had never worked and had always been supported by his family. He lived in Baton Rouge right up until the time of the murders in 2016. Supposedly he was training to become a plastic surgeon. The only reason Lisa Guy was working was to provide for his son. The rented flat, the car, the tuition fees from the university, and all Joel's living expenses were paid by her mother. His parents lost hope he could ever do anything useful in his life, so they decided to cut Joel's allowance. They planned to retire, sell their house at Knoxville, and move to Sirgoinsville to enjoy their pensions. Obviously, this didn't sit well for Joel Guy Jr. Without his parents around to support him, he would have to find a job and start looking for himself. For this reason, he concocted a sick plan to kill his parents and receive her mother's $500,000 life policy in case both parents were dead or missing. This macabre assassination took place in Knoxville, Tennessee, United States. The crime. On the Thanksgiving of November 24, 2016, in 2 days previous to the murders, Joel's parents gathered the family at home for what would be the last event in the Knoxville house. On November 26, 2016, while his mother was out shopping at the grocery shop, Joel attacked his father with a knife. He took the opportunity his father was exercising in the training room on the second floor to strike. Joel Jr. stabbed his father a total of 42 times. The room showed signals of struggle, with torn blinds, an exercise machine overturned, and a massive amount of blood in one corner of the room. When authorities entered the room, they found the clothes of his father piled where he was killed. A bloodied pack of cigarettes belonging to Joel Guy Sr. was also found on top of the pile. The authorities also found the severed hands of the victim on the floor of the room and 2 large knives. When Lisa Guy got home, she brought the groceries she had purchased and dropped them in the foyer. Then she climbed the stairs to the second floor. When she reached the top of the stairs, she was attacked by her son, who stabbed her at least 31 times. Blood spatters were found on the floor, walls, and doors. Then Joel Guy Jr. proceeded to cut and remove his mother's clothes and piled them up near where she was killed. Several tubes of sewer pipe cleaners were also found nearby. Both his parents had their limbs removed. The torsos had a large gash to let the chemicals reach the internal organs to speed up the decomposition process. Apart from Joel Guy Sr.'s hands and Lisa Guy's head, the remaining body parts were then introduced in the chemical corrosive solution to dissolve. Joel Guy Sr.'s hands were found on the floor of the training room where he was killed. Lisa's head was broken with force, brought downstairs to the kitchen, put in a pot, and left boiling on the stove for several days. Joel's plans to avoid punishment also involved an elaborated plot with several layers of complexity. After the bodies had been dissolved, he planned to clean the house, burn it, and frame his father for the crime. The investigation. Joel Guy Jr. was injured during the attack on his father in the training room. He suffered several cuts in his hands. After he had placed his parents' remains in the chemical solution, Joel raised the temperature in some rooms to speed up the decomposition process and left the house to have his hands treated in the student clinic in Baton Rouge. Before Joel had time to return to the Knoxville house, Lisa's absence was noticed at work. They tried to call her several times, but she didn't answer the phone. Not showing up to work without a warning was something out of character for her. So her employer called the police for a welfare check.
I want to direct your attention to Monday, November the 28th, and ask you what happened that day.
Well, Lisa, her work schedule started at 7 a.m., and I noticed at about 7:15 that she was not in the office. And I normally gave my employees about 15 minutes to get there, and, more out of being concerned that they were okay, I would start calling. So 7:15 came and she wasn't there. Nobody in our group had heard from her. So I began texting her, and she didn't text back. And I thought that was highly unusual. A lot of thoughts went through my mind, hoping that she was okay, hoping that, this was her last week. She was retiring, that she had blown us off. But I knew that wasn't right. So I continued to text her. I continued to text Joel Sr. I called and never did get an answer.
Would that have been unlike her to not show up for work and not to call?
Oh, absolutely. If she couldn't make it to work, she would have called me immediately.
And do I understand you to say that you also attempted to call her husband?
I did.
All right. And how many times would you say you called or texted?
I lost track of how many times, but I kept doing it thinking this time they're going to answer. I would say at least 20, at least.
And then what did you decide to do?
I wanted to call the police to have a welfare check done. So I called the police.
All right.
Knoxville Police Communications Center. Yes, I have an employee that has not reported for work today, and highly unlike her. I've tried calling her home number, I've tried calling cell phone, and can't get a hold of her. What can we do about that? Can somebody go by and check on them?
Yeah, do you know her address?
I do.
What is that?
It is 11434 Golden View Lane. My name is Jennifer Whited, Whited.
And what company are you with?
Jacobs Engineering.
And what's a good callback for you guys?
It is 865-216-6625.
Okay, what's the employee's name?
Lisa Guy, G-U-Y. Her husband's name is Joel, Joel.
Should he be there too? Does he live with her?
Yes, he does.
Okay.
And they do have a dog named Jake. I think he's a big baby.
Okay. How old is she, do you know?
She is in her, I think, late 50s.
Do you know if she has any medical issues?
No, I mean, she has high blood pressure, but that's all that I know of.
Okay.
Yeah, I know that their house is for sale, and they are moving, and she is leaving our company, but that's supposed to be Friday, and this definitely isn't like her just not to show up.
Okay. I'll send a call over to officers, have them swing by and check on her. And if anything changes before then, just give us a call back here, okay?
At the same number?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
After that, did you make a second call?
I did.
And can you tell the jurors about that?
I had realized that nobody had called me, still could not get a hold of Lisa or Joel, so I called back to see what they had found with the welfare check. And I was told that everything seemed to be fine, that nothing looked out of the place, and so they didn't do anything further. I asked them to please go back because I knew that something was not right. She had plans with other co-workers that day, and that she would not have canceled or just blown them off. She would have at least called. So I asked them to go back.
And what is the next thing you heard in request?
I was told that they would talk to a detective to see what they thought, and they would get back with me.
And what happened next?
It was probably 20 to 30 minutes later, I think, that I got a phone call from a detective wanting to ask me more questions about Lisa and what I knew. But I did not know that anything in particular had happened.
Was there something special planned that day for Lisa?
There was a lunch that she was going to have with some other coworkers for her retirement.
All right. And when did you hear what had happened?
In their home? What had happened in their home? I had heard that there were bodies found Monday evening, so that evening.
All right.
When the police arrived at the house, they found both their parents' cars parked at the entrance. They knocked at the door and called several times without any response from the interior of the house. The police officers noticed the shopping bags dropped in the foyer containing several perishable items, and the door's lock of the back door removed. Through the hole in the back door, they perceived heat emanating from the interior and a strange smell. A police officer found a way to open the garage's door, and they entered the house. Inside the house, they noticed the high temperature and a dog barking from inside a room. Downstairs, they found several items on display on top of tables, such as wallets, guns, and a sledgehammer. In the kitchen, they saw a big pot boiling on the stove. Upstairs they found Guy's severed hands on the floor of the training room, and the body's remains dissolving in the chemical solution placed in plastic bins in the bathroom. The house was declared a crime scene and the forensic team called to the house.
Hello, Sheriff's Office! There's a dog walking there.
I hear a dog howling.
Knox County Sheriff's Office!
Damn hammer.
Police! Police Department, Sheriff's Office! Knox County Sheriff's Office! Sheriff's Office!
I got the gun out here. Yeah, I got several.
Clear. Knox County Sheriff's Office! Back everybody out. That's blood, right? Everybody got
Looks like it.
that blood or boo-boo?
It looks like blood.
Anybody got gloves on?
Yeah, I'm not close.
Knox County Sheriff's Office! We're here to check your welfare! Just drop that. Knox County Sheriff's Office!
I've got one, probably one down here too, Jay. I'm going right, Benji.
What do you mean by got one, sir?
And that's where I noticed the hands at the end of the hallway. This room's clear. Hold up.
Oh my God.
You good, Jeremy? We got clear. Go. I'm going across. Got you. Clear. This door says where dog is. Knives. Blood. Is that people's hands? Yeah, I think so. That's what I think. That's what it looks like. What's your fucking hand?
Get out now.
I ain't cleared. We not cleared this. There's blood all over it though. You want to?
Can't back out. Everybody back out.
We need to start.
No.
A lot of. What do you got here?
Everything else already. You don't want to go in. Everything else already. I'll get on that. Don't call anybody else. I don't need shit blown up here. I'll get on that. Back out. After the garage, same way we came in, don't touch nothing.
In the guest's room, where Joel was sleeping while visiting his parents, the investigators found a notebook in Joel's backpack. In this notebook, Joel wrote a detailed plot of all the steps he needed to execute to complete the crime, plus a clear motive for why he killed both his parents. The sheriff's county and the FBI located Joel in Baton Rouge and placed him under surveillance for a few days. Joel was arrested on the 29th of November, while trying to get into his car in the parking lot of his apartment. In the trunk of the car, the police found the meat grinder, as he had written in his notebook. In the flat, further pieces of evidence were found, but they had to be discarded due to a judicial technicality. Irrefutable evidences. Among all the evidences and witnesses presented by the prosecutors, 3 pieces of evidence were by themselves solid proofs of the culpability of Joel Guy Jr. 1. Cut to the perpetrator. When Joel Guy Jr. attacked his father, he sustained several cuts to his hands, including a deep cut to his left thumb. At around 3:30 p.m., he was seen in Walmart purchasing bandages and ointment to treat the wounds. He also purchased isopropyl alcohol and hydrogen peroxide. On Sunday, he drove back to Baton Rouge to have his wounds treated at the student clinic. 2. Surveillance footage. The first footage goes as far back as November the 7th, 19 days before the crime. This gives an idea of how far back Joel Guy Jr. was already planning and preparing himself to kill his parents. Apart from the footage already mentioned where he bought ointment and bandages to treat the wounds of his hands, the police also gathered several footage from grocery stores of Joel Guy Jr. purchasing the items he needed to kill his parents, dismember them, and dissolve their remains in the chemicals. In every one of these transactions, he always used cash to prevent the billing from being linked to his credit card. 3. The handwritten list. An extensive list written by Joel Guy Jr. with details of the crime was found in his backpack. This list, besides confirming the involvement of Joel to the crimes, worked also as confirmation that the crime was premeditated.
What is depicted on this page of the photograph you took?
Yes. Get killing knives. Quick. Multiple. Get
Is that
carving.
quick, or is that
Quick.
Q-U-I? Is that a C or is it an E?
Quiet. Yes, it could be. Yes. I'm sorry. It appears to be an ET. Yes. Multiple. Get carving knives to make small pieces. Get sledgehammer. Crush bones. Bring blender and food grinder. Grind meat.
Keep going.
Get bleach. Denature proteins. Get plastic bin for denaturation process.
Keep going.
Does not matter where they're killed. Just get rid of bloody spots to prevent evidence of time of death, not the mattress or the couches. Get rid of bodies inside house. There and my DNA already there. And then there's a part that's scratched out. Open up doggy door to provide entryway.
Can you make out the...
It appears he needs to be, and I can't make out that word, not intruder.
Next line.
Flush chunks down toilet, not garbage disposal. Get plastic sheeting for disposal process. And then the part that's crossed out, get hollow point bullets just in case. Will be seen buying bullets, just use computer room gun. Check to make sure there are bullets. Last resort. He's not alive to claim her half of the insurance. Money, and then an arrow, all mine, 500,000. Flood the house. Covers forensic evidence. Turn heater up as high as it goes. Speeds decomposition. Bleach reacts with luminol, just like blood. Douse area with bleach. Big sprayer. Lie. Trash compactor. Body gives time of death. And an arrow, alibi. Don't have to get rid of body if there is no forensic evidence on the body. His fingerprints and DNA.
Okay. Next photograph would be 581, Exhibit 581. And if we could enlarge that and just read from the top, please.
Yes. Minimize things I touch throughout visit. Wear gloves and socks to prevent fingerprints and footprints. Drop something down the garbage disposal to break it. Get him on the ground fixing it. Kill him with the knife. Clean up mess from him before she gets home. Kill her with knife. There's a part that's crossed out. Kill dog after.
What's
And
written
then
above that?
leave alive. Can't read. Are you able to zoom in there?
Okay. And
It appears to be fingerprints.
okay.
And then take dog with you. I can't read the first word. Him with him is in parentheses.
Okay. The next line.
Place her in shower, and then with dog appears to be crossed out. Turn on hot water and point at her to get rid of forensics. Remove her clothes and take them with me for disposal. Place him in plastic bin and use it to get him into the upstairs bathroom. Cut off his arm and plant his flesh under her fingernails. Place her hand with his DNA so that his DNA is not washed away by the shower. Use sodium hydroxide to destroy his soft tissue and soften bones for transport. Baste once every hour to accelerate. Flush sodium hydroxide down the toilet. Wash out bin with handheld shower head and then direct handheld into toilet to flush everything out of the pipes and into the public waterway. Douse killing rooms, kitchen with bleach. Place hair curler with flammable paper and flammable containers of gasoline in 4 locations. His killing room, her killing room, his bathroom, her bathroom. Wipe down areas near killing rooms and bathrooms. Turn heaters up to 90 degrees to melt fingerprints and dry everything. Set her phone to send me a text message late Sunday to prove that I was in BR and she was alive, in quotation marks. Leave, and I can't read the word that's marked out, through front door and wipe down doorknobs. Timer for flammables set for Friday at 10 a.m. Sunlight masks fire, but not smoke. Everyone at work, so they can't report it.
I'm going to show you photograph 582 and ask you to, next one. If you could enlarge that, just read what is depicted in this photograph.
Ultraviolet light shows fingerprints. Check mail before leaving. To get rid of blood, use peroxide. And there's an arrow stating hemoglobin pointed at peroxide and bleach, and then an arrow DNA pointing at bleach.
Okay. And photograph 583.
It appears to be titled Destruction of Bodies, and then composition of body, 20% fat, 20% protein, 55% water, and 5% other compounds.
Okay. 584.
It appears to be titled Assets, her assets, her life insurance, $500,000, possibly more with double indemnity. With him missing / dead, I get the whole thing. All her other assets are joint. Go to him if missing, unknown if he is dead. His assets includes all joint property if missing. When he gets all joint property, also gets joint debt. Knoxville house, homeowner's insurance, possibly but probably worthless after fire. Owe $100,000. The Sir Gowensville house, appraised at $400,000 plus, worthless with Renee on property. Her car, his SUV, and that seems to be bracketed, not paid for. His boat, his old truck, and that seems to be bracketed with paid for. His 401k, $80,000, possibly less after. Zoom in on that word.
Can you zoom in? Could it be taxes?
It very well could be, yes.
Okay. And the next line?
He could possibly have savings and or investment accounts.
Okay. So the next exhibit would be 585.
The trial. Joel Guy Jr. pleaded not guilty to the murders of Joel Guy Sr. and Lisa Guy. Yet he filed a motion to receive the death penalty if found guilty. The defense lawyers presented no evidence on his behalf.
My brother had stated to me that he was retiring and moving up, and he had cut his son off from any money, anything. He was tired of keeping him up.
I mean, he said that Joe Michael was going to be cut off and going to have to stand on his own 2 feet.
Okay. Did you have any conversations with Lisa Guy about this?
Yes.
And what were those? What did she say to you?
She agreed. It was all in the same conversation with Dad and Lisa.
And this happened close in time to their deaths. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
It's been an ongoing family conversation and knowledge. I know Dad had cut Joe Michael off probably years before, and the only reason why Lisa ever had a job, because she didn't need to work, was to solely take her check and provide it to Joe Michael, so he didn't need to work.
He said that that Joe Michael was coming in Christmas because they wasn't going to do anything for Thanksgiving. He wasn't coming in for Thanksgiving. And they were going to talk to him then about him having to get a job and pay the bills and stuff down there because they were retiring and moving to Scornsville and they wasn't going to have any income.
Was Lisa there when that happened?
Yes.
Okay. Did she make any statements to you about it?
She said she was behind Mike.
Okay.
They were going to tell him.
Thank you. Pass the witness. Are you Joel Sr.'s daughter?
Yes, ma'am.
And the defendant's half-sister?
Yes, ma'am.
In the time shortly before their deaths in October, November of 2016, did your father make any statements to you about his intention for him and Lisa to stop providing financial support for the defendant?
Yes, ma'am.
Did Lisa make statements like this?
On October the 28th, my youngest birthday, Lisa and Dad did. On Thanksgiving, Dad did.
Okay, and let's talk about the October statement first. Tell us what Lisa said.
They had both said, but Lisa said that Joel Michael was going to have to find a job because they only had a certain amount of money. The retirement they had taken out his pension, and I'm not sure if that's the name of it, but they only had a certain amount to live on, and they would not be able to afford Joel Michael or paying for his apartment.
Okay,
things like that.
And on Thanksgiving, what did your dad say to you?
You could. There was a little bit of tension. And so when everyone was inside and it was just...
I'm sorry? I'm sorry.
It was just me and Dad and myself. That was bad grammar. It was just me and Dad. We were out on the porch, and he said that Lisa hadn't told Joel Michael, and that you could feel like that was what was causing the little bit of tension inside the house. That you could feel the tension.
Okay.
It was a little bit.
Did he say anything specifically about them withdrawing financial support from your brother?
That's what he said. He had told Joel Michael about the that they had told Joel Michael about him having to get a job or being cut off, but he didn't. I can't remember his correct verbiage, but it wasn't cut off. It's that they couldn't afford to support him any longer.
Okay. Thank you. Pass the witness. State your name for the record.
Jennifer Whited.
Where are you employed?
At Jacobs.
What was your relationship with Lisa Guy?
I was Lisa's supervisor.
When did she tell you she was, when did she turn in her notice or let you know she was going to stop working?
She gave me a written notice on November 21st, 2016.
Okay. When was her last day of work?
December 2nd.
Okay. Did she make any statements to you? Did you all talk about personal matters to some degree?
We did.
Okay. Did she make any statements to you regarding her intention, her future intention to stop supporting her son?
She did make mention of that. She talked about her and her husband both retiring and moving to the family home and not being able to continue to support.
Okay. And do you know when that conversation took place?
Probably October and November. Okay. I mean, we talked just about every day. I made a point to go around and talk to all of my employees, and so we talked.
So you were aware she was going to retire before she turned in her written notice?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Right. As a full-time employee, did she have benefits with the company?
Yes, she did.
Do you know whether or not she had a life insurance policy?
She did.
And do you know who her beneficiaries were for her life insurance?
I'm not 100% sure what the split was, but it was Joel Sr. and Joel Michael Jr. So Joel Guy Sr. was 50%, and then Joel Guy Jr. was also 50%.
Okay. And were you aware of the amount of her insurance coverage?
I know what the company provides employees, and it's based off of their pay, so I knew that she at least had that. I did not know if she had any additional that she had the option to purchase.
Okay. Did you have occasion to make any observations about your brother's car on that day?
I had, that day I had sent Dad a text. My dryer had broke. And I had sent Dad a text with a picture of all of my clothes in the back. And it was a full trunk full of clothes. And so when I had pulled in for my car to be right there so I could carry all of these clothes upstairs to his washer and dryer. But in walking past Joel Michael's car, there was this big totes in the back, and the lids were on them, and one was inside the other. But I thought he had carried his luggage in my brain, what my brain thought. Or my first reaction was that his luggage was in that car. Why he had carried, that's the reason I remembered it. Why did he put his luggage? Why does he not have luggage?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Describe those.
Yeah, so there were 5 stab wounds on the left side of his abdomen. He also had a large area on the right side of his abdomen where a portion of the abdominal wall was missing and through which some of the bowels protruded. And again, it was impossible for me to tell whether this was a very large sharp force injury, in other words, a large cut, or whether it was part of the dismemberment process. But I could distinctly see 5 stab wounds on the left side of his abdomen. And again, those were not stab wounds that were identified on the skin because the skin on the front of his body was completely gone. These were stab wounds that were identified once his body wall was reflected back for me to examine his internal organs.
Okay. And did you observe any evidence of injury to him internally as a result of the sharp force injuries?
Yes. Again, he had injuries to his liver, both lungs, both kidneys. He had injuries to multiple ribs. I think Dr. Marks, who is the forensic anthropologist, will describe those further, but he had 6 cuts on the, or 6 ribs were cut on the left, 6 ribs were cut on the right. And from what Dr. Marks described in his report, the location of those roughly approximates the stab wounds that I identified on his back.
Okay. And would you describe the sharp force injuries as occurring before death?
Yes, the 34 wounds on his back were consistent with being inflicted while he was still alive.
Okay. Was there any other evidence that you received or observed to indicate that Mr. Guy was alive when he was attacked? Did you observe any injuries did you examine his hands?
I did examine his hands. His hands were the only part of the dismembered remains that were basically still intact. So the skin of the hands had not been treated with any chemical, had not been put in the chemicals. They were found in a different room of the home from where the bins were, and the skin of the hands, other than being slightly dried from very early decomposition, the skin was intact and very well preserved. So the wounds on Mr. Guy's back ranged up to about 6 inches deep. Again, that is an approximation because some of his body was not there anymore, which would allow us a more accurate measurement. But the best approximation is about 6 inches deep. The wounds on the hands were much more superficial. Mr. Guy had some small abrasions on the back of his right hand. He had a small abrasion on his left little finger. And on the palms of his hands, he had multiple what we call linear cutting wounds or linear incised wounds that I would describe as classic defensive injuries. And they're described as classic defensive injuries because they're on the palms of the hands and the palm side of the fingers that will be consistent with someone putting their hands out either in a defensive motion or potentially grabbing a sharp edge weapon as a way to defend themselves. So this is the approximate location. There were actually 5 stab wounds. There's only 4 circles there on the left. But again, this diagram demonstrates that virtually all the skin had been dissolved away on Mr. Guy's, the front of his torso, and that his arms were disarticulated and his legs were disarticulated and his head was skeletonized. This is the approximate location. Again, these were visualized not in the fat like we see here, but once the abdominal wall was reflected or opened, I could actually see on the inside where those stab wounds entered into the body cavity. And the large drawing on Mr. Guy's right, which would be your left, is that large area on the abdominal wall that I described that I don't know if it was part of the dismemberment process or whether it was just an extremely large sharp force wound that was inflicted while he was still alive.
So you don't have an opinion with respect to that largest wound, that whether or not it was before death or after death, you can't determine?
I can't.
Okay. And does this indicate that Mr. Guy was assaulted both from the front and the back, your findings?
Yes.
Okay. And next, B, this exhibit, and if we could enlarge that. So if you could just discuss your findings and the diagram.
Sure. Again, this demonstrates that Mr. Guy's head was completely skeletonized, the arms were disarticulated, and the legs are as well. There was still some skin on his back. And these are the approximate, again, not an exact replica, but the approximate number and location of wounds on both sides of Mr. Guy's back.
Okay. So the wounds that affected his liver, was that from the abdominal wounds or from the wounds from the back?
It could have been from either.
Okay.
Or both.
Is that the same with the kidneys?
The kidneys.
Kidney, right?
The kidneys were likely from the back as opposed to the front.
All right. And the wounds, the injuries to his lungs would clearly be from the sharp force injuries to the back. Is that?
Most likely from the back, yes.
Now, what was your ultimate finding as to his cause of death?
So the cause of death of Mr. Joel Guy Sr. is multiple sharp force injuries.
And the manner of death?
Homicide.
Could you turn the lights on, please?
This is a photograph showing the back portion of Mr. Guy's dismembered hands. And as you can see, as I previously testified to, the skin is in relatively good condition. There's a little bit of drying that's noted at the tips of the fingers. That's just a normal postmortem change. You will note here, here, and here are the abrasions and superficial sharp force injuries that I previously testified to. You can begin to see some of the other sharp force injuries here and here that are consistent with defensive type injuries from a sharp wound. This area right here is the very edge of the area where the hands were dismembered from the wrist. This is the palm side of Mr. Guy's dismembered hands, showing the sharp force injuries that I have previously described, both on the left hand and the right hand. The longest wound you can see across the palm. Here, it's a very superficial, again, it's described as a linear incised wound, and that's a cut from a sharp-edged instrument, such as a knife. And there are other injuries that you can see here, 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 and here. Also on the tip of the right middle finger, there is more incised wound there at the web of the right thumb. And again, these wounds, as you can see, are consistent with either placing your hands outward to block a blow or potentially grabbing the sharp weapon as a protective measure or a defensive measure. So like Mr. Guy, Mrs. Guy was also dismembered. There was some differences in the degree to which she was dismembered and the way she was dismembered. Her head was completely severed from her body. Her arms were disarticulated at the shoulders, and her legs were disarticulated at the knees. So in comparison to Mr. Guy, who had his legs disarticulated at the hips, Mrs. Guy's legs were at the knee. So her thighs were still intact. Her thighs were still attached onto her body, but her head was completely severed and her arms were completely severed. Much like Mr. Guy, the skin of her back was still relatively well preserved compared to her front, where there was almost no skin left. Mrs. Guy's head was found in a large pot in liquid in the kitchen. The liquid in the pot had a slightly different character to it than the liquid in the plastic tubs. It didn't have the strong chemical odor. It had a slight odor of decomposition, but it did not have the chemical odor like the bins upstairs did. And the skin that remained, the skin and flesh that remained on her scalp was different. It did not have the top layer of skin was still intact. In other words, the skin looked like it had heat artifact, or what we call thermal artifact, as opposed to a chemical artifact. The hair was still there as well. And so those were the primary differences. Miss Guy had multiple sharp force injuries on her back. She had at least 25, and again, I'm having to do a little bit of a hedge because of the degree to which the remains were altered. Again, the wounds were on both sides of her back. They were approximately 6 to 7 inches deep. They included injuries to the heart, so the right ventricle or the right side of her heart, the aorta in her abdomen, which is the major blood vessel that leaves the heart and feeds the lower portion of the body. Both lungs were injured, the left kidney, the liver, and her third thoracic vertebra, so a bone in the spine also appeared to be injured. She also had 5 stab wounds that were relatively superficial on her buttock as well.
Would you describe these wounds as before death, peri-mortem?
For the ones that I could tell, yes. There was also a large cutting wound on the right side of her abdomen that was in a similar location to Mr. Guy that I was not able to tell if it was related to the dismemberment or whether it was a pre-mortem sharp force injury. So the dismembered remains of Mr. Guy are in this container. The dismembered remains of Mrs. Guy are in this container.
You described Joel as being socially awkward. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And as I think you've described him as he got older after high school, he became more and more isolated and withdrawn.
Yes.
And he would go into his room at time for days. Is that right?
Yes.
And he would kind of escape on his computer. Is that right?
Yes.
And I think you said that he spent an awful lot of time on the internet and YouTube and that sort of thing.
Yes.
And you said, I believe you've stated that there were weeks where you would just barely see him at all.
Right.
And did you know him to have any friends?
When we were in high school and early college.
And did you see in the later years, at least the last 3 or 4 years that you were together in Baton Rouge, did you see that tail off?
Yes.
By the time you left Baton Rouge, would you say that he had any friends at all?
No.
So was he socially interacting with anyone but you?
No.
And your interactions with him were becoming less and less. Is that accurate?
Correct.
I think you described him as your best friend during that period of time.
Yes.
Did you know the defendant, Joel Michael Guy?
Yes.
How did you know him?
We went to high school together and college together, and we were roommates off and on through that time.
All right. Did you receive a telephone call from him on or about December the 10th of 2016?
Yes.
Very, very realistic chance of being happy if I got around to doing that. Well, I've pretty much fucked everything up. I don't really have much of a chance of being happy anymore. But you do. You do. Eventually you're going to meet somebody, and you've claimed that I haven't been an albatross or anything before, but I certainly would be now. If we had freaking prison. On that basis, I think you should probably just sort of consider me dead and move on with your life. So I'm not going to try to initiate any more contact with you beyond sort of, the practical concerns we discussed earlier. And I may do that with a lawyer because I genuinely do want you to be happy. And that's pretty much the end of my outburst. So there you go.
Okay. I don't know what else to say.
child. And I mean, I've been my best friend for my entire adult life. I don't know that that would ever have changed regardless of what you did.
It wasn't news.
1 minute remaining.
Oh, shit.
Oh, shit.
Can you write more time?
I mean, I'm not fully surprised. I don't know. I don't know what to say. All of that aside, I am angry and lost and confused and disappointed and upset and mourning you like your day, even though I'm talking to you on the phone and I don't. It's taking everything I have to process and maintain my sanity.
I mean, that is the biggest thing here is that I think that of you all the time. You were the only good thing in my life. All the crap in the apartment. You're the only thing on this? Yeah, God. Her date went through August. So it's not like the manager's going to be throwing my shit out on the street anytime soon.
Yeah. How did you manage that? That's a lot of money.
Yeah. One of the last things I thought they did was pay that. So.
Okay.
It's about money. And that sounds so terrible to think that you could kill your mother and your father for money, but that's really pretty much what it all boils down to. And that is evidenced also by his writing, by the notebook. Money, all mine. He had made calculations. He had thought about it. He spent some time. I mean, it's sort of a meticulous account of his intentions. We have basically what amounts to a diary that outlines a plan of intention to kill. And we have a motive, and there it is. He's smart enough to know that once his mom retires, once she quits her job, that insurance money is gone. He isn't getting that. He's not getting that. And he's not used to supporting himself. He's used to having the support and care from his mother, primarily, taking care of his needs, providing him with an apartment, with utilities, with a car, gas money, paying his bills, his tuition, paying for his books, paying for everything. He's used to having her pay for everything. And he wasn't about to let them cut him off. That was not going to happen. These people, they were not going to disrupt his comfortable life. He wasn't going to permit it. He would rather see them dead than let that happen. And that's what he planned, and that's what he did. And then he used their money, not just, it's sort of like a double motive. He wants to do it for the insurance money, but he also wants to get what he can while he can. And I want you to think about that too. He made these transactions after he murdered them, within a very short time period, which I submit to you is during the course of the homicides, because it's all part of the same incident. He pays his tuition in advance. He pays a bill in advance, which Michelle Tyler told you was his utilities. Michelle said that he paid his apartment rent in advance. He talks to Michael McCracken about paying his rent in advance. Now, why do you think he did that? I was puzzled over this. I thought, why in the world would he be so quick to pay everything in advance? Why would you do that? You know why you would do that? Because it takes a while for an estate to be settled. It takes a while for an insurance company to make the decision to give you money. He needed a cushion. He needed about 3 or 4 months of his bills being paid while he waited to collect. Well, he waited to collect on his mother's insurance. So that's why those things were paid in advance, and that's why he did it in a hurry. Well, let's talk about how hard it was to kill Mom and Dad. I want you to think about the last moments that Joel Guy Sr. spent on this earth. He was attacked by his own son. He had to fight him off, and it was a fierce fight. You saw the evidence in that room. I don't have to show it to you again. You saw his hands, both of his hands. At some point, that man had his hands on the knife that his son was using to kill him. And he knew it was his son. He faced him. He was stabbed in the gut. He knew his attacker. Think about that. Think about that. Think about the blood in that room. Think about that corner. Think about the thrashing about. It's no surprise that the defendant was hurt. It's no surprise at all he was hurt in that struggle. And he must have been feeling some pain when he had to kill his poor mother. There she was at Walmart at 12:18. How tragic that your last moments on earth were at a Walmart, buying bacon and sausage and food to prepare a nice breakfast probably for your dear son who was home for one of his few visits. There she was, purchasing things to take care of her boy, getting him ice cream. Watching her put on her jacket because it was cold. It's very heartbreaking. But Lisa came home, and she lugged all of those bags of groceries in by herself, and she got them in, and something made her go upstairs. What was it? Did she hear the struggle between her son and her husband? Did she? Or did he call her? Did he tell her to come upstairs? Did he say, "Mother, I'm hurt"? We don't know. We'll never know. All we know is that when she got to the top of the stairs, there he was, and he had a knife, and he stabbed her, and she saw him. She was stabbed in the clavicle. She saw this boy, her only child. You heard the testimony about how much she loved him, how she worked only to support him. And he cut her up. He cut her up. And then he cut her clothes off her body. He cut off her jeans. He cut off her panties. He cut off her shirt. He cut off her bra. He took off her ring, and he left it in the floor. He cut off her head. He cut off his mother's head. He cut off his father's clothes. He pulled his jeans down. He piled it all up beside him. He left his cigarettes, Joel Sr.'s cigarettes, bloody pack on top. It struck me as an act of contempt. You know, here's your smokes, Dad. That's what he did. And he did it for money. And after he killed her, I don't know what time it was. It was probably sometime after 12:30. He left their bodies to cool off, you know, because he was hurt, and he had to go take care of himself. Do you remember seeing Lisa's purse on that? It was the kitchen table, not the dining room table, and her wallet. He had done that, okay? The police didn't do that. The defendant had gone through her purse and had taken out her wallet and his father's wallet, and he got money. Okay, he needed cash. Lisa Guy paid for the medical supplies that he bought to treat his hands that he hurt when he was killing his father. And then, just as calmly as you please, he goes to the Walmart. He goes through the doors, and he goes to the medical department, and he buys his bandages, and he buys hydrogen peroxide, 2 bottles of it, 2 big bottles of rubbing alcohol, because you know what? Rubbing alcohol and peroxide in small, even small bottles can destroy evidence. They can clean your wounds, but they can also clean things off, like that K-bar knife, for example, that's on the bathroom counter. She paid for his medical supplies. She paid for all of this, okay? Because she was supporting him. And think about that. She paid for the drain cleaner she was dissolved in. She paid for the muriatic acid. She paid for the work lights that he thought he was going to need. She paid for the sledgehammer. She paid for the timers. She paid for the plastic sheeting. She paid for that garden hose. She paid for the small sprayer in the master bathroom. She paid for the big sprayer, the bleach sprayer that was left in the floor of the kitchen. She paid for those garbage bags. She paid for his socks. She paid for his red potato salad that he got when he was buying his medical supplies, because he worked up an appetite after all of that, and he was in the mood for some red potato salad. Think about that. Think about that. She paid for the tubs that she and her husband disintegrated in. She worked all those years at Jacob Engineering to put him up, to keep him in his lifelong whatever program he's in at LSU. And you know what, ladies and gentlemen? She was still looking for a job in Seguinsville. Do you remember Renee Charles telling you that? She wasn't going to cut him off. She was going to find a job up there. She was going to keep supporting him. Oh my goodness. She gave him everything he wanted. And then she had the nerve to tell him that they retired and needed a break. Nobody else had a reason to do this, okay? No one else. And the proof in this case isn't strong. It isn't it isn't anything other than overwhelming. Overwhelming. And we ask you to consider everything in this case, and we ask you to convict him of premeditated murder, convict him of felony murder, and convict him of abusing the corpses of his mother and his father. Thank you.
The letter. During the trial, a letter written by Joel Guy Jr. was found in his cell and delivered to the judge. In the letter dated October 8, 6 days after a jury found him guilty of his parents' death and the judge dismissed his petition to receive death penalty, Joel wrote in a notebook how he fantasized about gouging out his cellmate's eyes. I will read the part of the letter I can understand. This was a bad idea. I'm psychologically unstable. I'm having fantasies of using my fingers to gouge this gentleman's eyes out of his head while he's unconscious, and therefore wouldn't be able to defend himself. Given that in this fantasies it is essential that I use my fingers, a no sharp resolution will accomplish nothing. I am writing this letter because I don't want to end up with a disciplinary infraction or worse, more criminal charges. End of reading. After having analyzed the letter, the judge understood it was nothing but a scheme so Joel would have a cell for himself. In response, the judge said to Joel Guy Jr., You are not as smart as you think." And then he proceeded to dismiss the letter. The sentence. In October of 2020, Joel Guy Jr. was convicted and received a 2-life sentence for the murdering of his parents. He was also convicted of the abuse of a corpse. Judge Sword, the presiding judge of the case, said it was the most extreme form of abuse of a corpse he had seen in his career. I have started this YouTube channel mainly to promote my work as a writer. If you like reading, I would like to suggest to you my first novel, Those Who Have Returned. It's a supernatural horror drama. Or, if you like my content, you can also subscribe or support me on Patreon so I can keep doing more videos. Thanks for watching the video until the end.